only mode.
Hello, everybody. This is your webinar host here. Just making sure that we have a couple more minutes, well, about 1 minute before we officially starting, but people tend to roll in a little bit afterwards. So I'll give them about a minute or so before we go ahead and kick things off. But this is about the volume that I'm going to have throughout the webinar. So adjust your headsets or headphones or whatever it is that you're listening to, speakers, maybe you're in a movie theater even watching this, right? And we'll be able to kick things off in just a couple of minutes. And as people are pouring in here right at the start of the hour, going to just wait a minute or so before I go ahead and kick things off. We do have a pretty full schedule. I'm going to try to make sure that I can fit everything into the webinar here today that I have planned, but just to give everybody the same kind of start, we'll just go ahead and wait just a minute or so before we go ahead and get things started. All right, that is that minute that I've been talking about. So let's go ahead and kick things off. So welcome everybody to the fourth installment of the Kendo UI DevChat, where we're going to be talking about building responsive dashboards with Angular and Bootstrap 4. So a very exciting topic. Hopefully I'll be able to teach you guys some things about both Angular and Bootstrap, especially if you haven't taken a look at the latest version of Bootstrap with V4. But just before I go ahead and kick things off, just as a quick little introduction so you know who is talking to you throughout this webinar. My name is Carl Bergenham, and I am the Kendo UI product manager. And I wanted to take the time today, of course, to not only share some love about Bootstrap and Angular, but also, here and there, maybe chit chat a little bit about Kendo UI and where that fits in. But you can find me on Twitter tweeting at Carl Bergenham. And for everybody that's already asking, probably, you can feel assured that we will be recording this webinar. We'll be posting on YouTube, so you'll be able to go ahead and view that at your own leisure afterwards. Also, I'll be posting a follow-up blog post, answering questions, etc., and providing some additional links. So feel free to watch out for that. We'll have both on the Telerik blog, and I'll, of course, tweet about it as well. But that's really it. I always promise with these things that I want to go ahead and jump into the actual presentation as quickly as possible. So we'll go ahead and do so. Now, one thing that I do want to mention before I start slinging too much code is that I think that after this, the best thing for you to do, if you're interested in Bootstrap, if you haven't taken a look at Bootstrap V4 yet, is to check out the online documentation that they have. So just Google Bootstrap V4, and this page will pop up. You'll see here that you have the V4 alpha prefix here. And they have done a great job with not only, of course, the getting started experience for how you can include it either with the CDN or through installing it with NPM, but they also dive well into not only the layout, but also the various components that they have to offer. So what I'm talking about here today is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. This will allow you to be able to really dive into things quite a bit more. Now, that being said, let me go ahead and bring up two things on the main screen here. And these are going to be the two main views that you have today as we go ahead and code through this application. Now, as you can see on the left-hand side, this is just a regular Angular Bootstrap application that I have through the CLI, and I've done a couple of quick modifications to it that I'll go through in a second. But before I do that, I just want to do a quick highlight of a couple of things that we'll be covering today, and also kind of just what's new in Bootstrap V4. And this is kind of the quick version. There are a lot of resources out there, and I'll be adding that to the blog post as a follow-up that covers specifically what's new. But just as a quick highlight, SAS is being used instead of less. The panel, thumbnail, and well classes are now removed, and the card replaces them. So we'll be talking about that today quite a bit. They now are using Flexbox by default. The font size has gone up from 14 to 16 pixels. I know that's a huge deal. And instead of working with pixels as their main unit of measure, except for media queries and things like that, they're now using REM. That's the kind of quick little digest there. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of other things that's new, of course, so you can cover either in the follow-up blog post or, of course, diving into the source code and diving into the documentation that they have on the official Bootstrap page. So now, what have I done with this project aside from just doing a quick npm install the Angular CLI and then gone ahead and created a project? I've done a couple of things. One is I've installed Bootstrap through the npm installer, so I don't have to worry about working with the CDN or anything like that. And then what I've gone ahead and done is I've gone into the Angular CLI.json here, and I've done two things. One, within the styles array here, I've added the Bootstrap project that's now in my node modules. And then this scripts tag tends to be empty when we first go ahead and start, but I've also added the required JavaScript files from Bootstrap. So here they do include jQuery, we have Tether, and then Bootstrap, the min.js. Now, on top of that, I've also just gone ahead and if we just open up app.module.ts, we'll see here that I've gone ahead and just bootstrapped a couple different things, pun intended, of course, from what we're including here on the Angular side, but we don't have to worry too much about that until we, of course, jump into the actual code there. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that when I actually work with the Angular CLI.json, if I inspect these elements here and I pop over into the elements tag, we'll see, or tab, I should say, we'll see that Bootstrap actually gets included on the page. And this is very similar to how things get, you can set this up to include all your own styles as well, because they do also include styles.css, which right now is empty. But if I scroll down, we'll see here that that's also added here at the top. So this just gives us a quick and easy way to include Bootstrap on the page. And already these fonts are looking pretty. And of course, that gives us some flexibility of using all the Bootstrap features just right out of the gate. So let's go ahead and actually start off somewhere, right? So in my app.component.html, I'm just going to start there for now. I don't want to have anything that we have here. I want to kind of think about what I would do in a scenario where I want to be able to build some sort of dashboard, right? Because that's kind of what we're talking about today. The first thing that I want to be able to do, of course, is I probably want some sort of navigation at the top of my page, right? Because that tends to be what a lot of folks do in the dashboard applications. And this can simply be done by including a nav element, which of course is nice from the semantics point of view, but we'll just give that a class of nav. And then for each element, so if I want to do an anchor, we can do a class of nav link. And then we'll just do, throw in href just for best practices. So we can do that. If I save this, we'll go ahead and refresh the application on the left. And we'll see now that we have a link up here. I can continue to do this if I wanted to throughout the application. So if I throw in 3 of these links, we'll see that it refreshes, and we have something at the top here, and we can see that it already kind of follows this, from left to right with some padding and margins and everything like that, which is nice. And now I do see, as we're going through here, by the way, that people are asking questions, and I should have mentioned in the beginning that I'll have a kind of a dedicated Q&A session at the end, and we'll be able to walk through things and answer some of the questions there. You can do things in here, like, for example, also adding active, and we can set up disabled if you want to. And now we can see that we have this disabled area, and the active one doesn't necessarily look any different right now, but that's just based on the quick and simple navigation that we have here. So I could continue with this if I wanted to. However, I do want to maybe make this a little bit more advanced, right? Because I don't just want to have a nav bar like this that's white on white. I want to be able to dive a little bit deeper into that. And what I can do is, if I just go back to this nav bar here, instead of doing nav, I can actually call it a nav bar in the class. And then we have a couple of quick things that we need to add in order to be able to get a full navigation bar at the top there. We do nav bar, toggleable, which is a mouthful, MD, and I'll go into a little bit of what that means in a bit. I'll do BG primary and then nav bar inverse. So if I go ahead and save that, we'll see that the application changes a little bit here, but we just get a blue bar at the top here. And if I add some additional pieces in here, so I'll just add a blank div for now. I'll go into Y in a second. I'll work with an unordered list for this, nav bar nav. So that gives us an indication of what classes to use for the unordered list, right, to give it a full nav bar kind of feel. And then we'll do an li with the class of nav item. We'll end that li right here. And then we'll do another anchor element here. And we'll do, and I'll just say Bootstrap for this one. All right, so if I save this, we'll see now that the application should refresh for us. Of course, I could have also messed up some code here, which I did. That's the beauty of live coding. So let me just quickly snag the code that I have saved over here in a snippet, which really is what we're building towards anyways, where I just added this anchor element and then two more. So I have Bootstrap, widgets, and about. What we'll see now is that this menu, first of all, looks a little bit prettier than what I had before, right? It gives us a solid background. If I don't have as small of a screen as I do here, we'll see that the menu is laid out nicely for us here. But if I go ahead and make this smaller, we'll see that it kind of automatically does some sort of responsiveness, right? It lists it from top to bottom. Not necessarily ideal for where I want to be, but it still gives us something. Now, just to mention what we have here, so navbar toggleable MD. This is just something that's required to set up and say, okay, I want this navigation bar to be something that we can toggle in order to be able to work with responsiveness and have maybe an item that allows me to open and close the menu. BG primary actually works with navbar inverse. So by default, Bootstrap V4, everything is kind of a light gray kind of a theme on the background. You've probably seen that in a lot of Bootstrap application. And navbar inverse is just for dark background, so black, blue in this case, or anything that might require white text on top. And BG primary, this is just for background colors, and primary just ends up being this nice blue color, so that's what I've added in here. Now, if we wanted to be able to take this one step further, and actually instead of having this kind of menu when we have a smaller screen real estate and we want to actually be able to have something that can toggle, what we can do is we can, first of all, take this div right here that I added, and we'll do class equals navbar collapse, and then collapse. So this might be a little bit confusing, but I'll explain this in a bit, and then I'll just call this my nav bar. There we go. So if I refresh this now, we'll see that the menu actually disappears and goes back to this little thin piece. And that's because when we have navbar collapse like this, that just means that this is the element that will, the parent element and everything inside of it will disappear after we've gone ahead and actually hit this MD, the medium breakpoint that we have within Bootstrap. So if I want to have something that's responsible for toggling this, I can add in a button, call it, give it a class. So we see a lot of classes here, right? Navbar toggler, and we do navbar toggler right. So that just means that it appears on the right-hand side. And then I'll define this as type button. And I'll go ahead and also add in a span, give that class of navbar toggler icon, which simply just adds an icon that looks like a hamburger menu. And the last thing that I'll do here within the button is I'll actually go through and do data toggle equals collapse, and then data target equals, and I'll give this the ID that I have down here. So hashtag my navbar. So this is just required to ensure that when we click on the button, something happens and the menu opens and closes. Now, you probably can't see this because it's kind of tiny right now, and you can see that this kind of doesn't cover it. But there is a little menu icon here for a hamburger menu that we can open and close. Not necessarily constantly there. So what I want to do is there's a couple different ways that we can fix this. But what I like to do is there's also the idea of what we call a brand. So we can just add a href. We'll just add that class equals navbar brand navbar. There we go. And then we'll just call this a Bootstrap webinar. All right, go ahead and save that. So now we'll see that we get a full menu here that pops open. We have the Bootstrap webinar. So this can be a logo. This can be, of course, the name of the application, whatever it might be. Dashboards usually have some sort of branding, right? Dashboards usually have some sort of indication of who made it, or something fun that you named it internally. And we now have this little toggle that can happen. All right, perfect. So now that we have the nav bar, all right, let's go ahead and add in some of the Bootstrap elements that we want to be able to work with. So let's just go here, and I'll make this a little bit smaller again, right? So under my navigation here, I'll just do div of class equals container fluid. And container fluid, there's both container and container fluid. Container, what that will do is it'll have a fixed width for all of the various sizes that we have within Bootstrap. So, extra small, small, medium, large, and now they have also extra large available to us. So that actually has some fixed widths assigned to it. Container fluid allows us to be able to take up the entire width and everything that's available to us. Add in a row. So this is all very something that you're probably used to quite a bit already, right, within Bootstrap. I'll add a column to it. And now I want to be able to start introducing the card class we were talking about. So I'll do, or component, I should say. I'll give this a class of card. And then within this, I'll do another div. I'll say card block. All right, and then awesome text is awesome. All right, go ahead and save that. And we'll now see that this refreshes, and we get this little block of text, right, that takes up essentially the entire width that we provided to it, and gives us a little bit of an indication of an area, right, that is isolated and has some sort of structure around it. Now, the next thing that we might want to do is maybe just let's add another kind of block in here. So what I can do is I can add another column for us. And then just for the sake of time, what I'm going to do here is that I am going to throw in the HTML here from something that I have saved already. Go ahead and just refresh this, and we'll see now that we get another kind of not necessarily a panel, right? This is again the card that's looking to replace the panel and the thumbnail and everything like that. But we have these concepts now of working with the card title. We have card subtitle. You can also even throw in like text muted, so it gives this nice little gray feeling to it, right? And these are all just, again, to replace some of those features that you might have seen in Bootstrap V3 and kind of started to use already. So everything just falls into this card block area. Now, of course, this kind of, right now we don't have any padding for the top of the row or anything like that, so it can start looking a little bit weird. So what I want to do is I want to throw in a my-3. And what this my-3 does for the row is it actually adds some margin into this row that we have here. So the M here stands for margin, Y stands for the Y-axis, and then -3, that's just a size, how many units that we want to be able to provide of space. So this can actually be tackled onto just about any container within a component within Bootstrap, which is pretty nice. But we can, of course, also still work with the traditional things that we have within, Bootstrap. So we can set this to an SM3, and then we can do set the column to an SM, for example, 5 if we wanted to, right? Now, the last thing that I wanted to cover within cards, and I'll throw in a full column here for us, again, just for the sake of time. I want to make sure that we can get through everything that I covered today. And when I refresh the application, we can now see that. Let me actually expand this a little bit because I haven't set up anything with the button. We have a card now that has a header that gives us, a unique little kind of header to work with this particular content area. We can still work with titles. We can add in subtitles. We can have links. We can have buttons. We can have just about anything in here. If we did a little bit more of styling on the button, it could also make sure that it works when it's a little bit smaller like this on the screen, of course. But for this particular case, the main idea really is to give you an idea of what these cards look like. And these are some of the most common scenarios that I've seen of our clients working with Bootstrap V3, and I just wanted to kind of give you an indication of, okay, what can I do instead of the panel, or what can I do instead of some of these other components that we've already been working with, right? All right, so now we have some Bootstrap elements to work with in the application, but honestly, we have a menu that doesn't really do anything, so I want to go ahead and add some routing into my application. So now we're going to be spending a little bit more time within the actual Angular project here. So let me expand this and give us access to all the things we have here within my actual Angular project, right? So let me open up the application here, go into app.module.ts, and we'll see that I went ahead and I went with the router module and the routes. I've already included those. And that comes from add Angular router, so you can start using that within your application. Now, if I want to be able to set up some basic routes, let's say I want to be able to add in and isolate these widgets that I have over here in a new component, I can go ahead and just have some sort of variable that I can define to be my routes. Right? Every dashboard needs to have some sort of navigation, right? And then for each one of these routes that I want to be able to define, I can set up a path. I can just call this Bootstrap. And for some reason, I always write Bootstrap, so I'm glad that it actually writes out Bootstrap this time. All right, component, and we can pass in, for now, Bootstrap component. Now, Angular is going to yell at us for this, right? Because we do not have an official Bootstrap component. So we can go ahead and add that. But before I do that, the way that I can ensure that these routes will later work is if I go ahead, let's see here. Can everybody still hear me? I believe you still can. Perfect, perfect. All right. Something just happened on the audio on my side, so I wanted to make sure that everybody can go ahead and still hear me. Oh, seems like we might have actually lost some sound. So let me just go ahead and double check that I am indeed still logged in. All right, perfect. A lot of you are now saying we can hear you. All right, sorry about that, folks. I just saw some complaints about losing audio, and I heard some weird glitch on my side. So sorry about that. Anyways, Angular's complaining, right? We don't have this Bootstrap component yet. But before I go ahead and do anything else, I want to remember that in my import statement, I'll throw in the router module, do a for route, and then I'll pass in this app routes right here. All right, go ahead and hit save. Still going to yell at us though. So let's go ahead and quickly add in the Bootstrap component. So I'll just go ahead into my app folder and do bootstrap.component.html first, and then I'll also do new file of bootstrap.component.ts. See, here we go. I already started calling things Bootstrap. So let me just make sure that's correct. All right, and of course, just to give us some quick component bootstrapping. Again, I'll be using that word a lot, not just in the sense of Bootstrap the framework, but also, of course, what we're doing in here. I'll jump over to app.modules, and then here, of course, I'll go ahead and import this from bootstrap.component, and I'll also throw this in here. There we go. So it'll stop yelling at us, I believe. Yes, perfect. All right, but now, of course, if you go to /bootstrap, nothing will really happen because we haven't set this up quite yet, and the Bootstrap component currently is completely blank. So what I'll do is I'll actually take everything that we have in here, except the navigation, right? Because we want to be able to keep that. Go ahead and save that. Pop over to my Bootstrap component, save this here. And the last thing that we want to do is that we want to throw in what's called the router outlet. So this gives us kind of the placeholder for where we want all the routing to be able to show up. So wherever you place this is where all the routing will kind of show. So now we have the app component has a navigation, which helps, of course, and then we can just work with the router outlet and throw components in there. One thing that I also want to mention is right here on the index.html page, you have this base with an href and just a slash. And this is required to just give the router an idea of where is kind of the root of the application, right? Where does it kind of start from? So that usually is actually already included if you use the Angular CLI, but that's just something to be aware of when you start working with the Angular router, that you need to include that. All right, so now we see that when we go to /bootstrap, we get this beautiful page, right? And that's perfect. What I also want to do is I want to go through and actually define a route that automatically goes to Bootstrap when we just do, a regular local host and just a quick slash. And the way that we can do that is that we can define a route, give it a path of just something empty, and then we pass in redirect to, or define, I should say, or just /bootstrap. And then we'll do also what's called path match. We'll set that to full. So now this gives me the flexibility of when this application refreshes, when I go to localhost, we'll automatically go to /bootstrap and bring up this page here. All right, so that's pretty nice and easy, right? So now that we have that, let's add another widget. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'll do a new file here, and I just call it actually widgets.component.ts. And I'll throw in, of course, the HTML file. So widgets.component.html. Okay, perfect. Now within that, I'll go ahead and quickly go into my TS file here. I'll add just a quick bootstrapping of that widget, of course. And for now, within this HTML here, I'm just going to define an H1. I'll just say widgets. All right, so now that we have that, let me just close down some of these other tabs here. I'll just actually close all tabs. I'll pop back in here into app.module, right? I'll import the widget we just made. So Angular doesn't yell at us first. Maybe this time we can be a little bit ahead of the yelling game, right? So we'll import that from /widgets.component. Perfect. And then, oh, it still managed to yell at me because I forgot the dot. All right, let's go ahead and also import that there in the declarations before I forget. And if we want to navigate to this now, what we can do is we can define another path. We'll just say that this is going to be widgets. And then we'll pass in a component. There we go. Let me just make sure that I spelled everything correctly. widgets.component.html cannot be found. Interesting, interesting. Let me just rename this. Hopefully that helps. There we go. Of course, that's the beauty of the live demo, right? Again, me fat fingering things here and there. All right, so if you go into that module, we see that we now have widgets. So if I do /widgets, we'll see now that, woo, we get the H1. It says widgets, and everybody's super happy, right? So now that we have these two pages, what we notice, though, is that I can just navigate to them, of course, with the roots, but I can't navigate to it with these menu options that I have up here, right? So let's change that. Let's close these out. Go into app.component.html, and let's start tweaking things a little bit in here. So what we can start doing is that these anchor elements that we have here, right? What we can say is that we can add attributes to them in order to be able to work with Angular. So we have the concept of what's called a router link. And kind of as the name gives away, right? This links to the router, or is a link for the router that allows us to be able to take advantage of the Angular router. So I'll just do /bootstrap for this one. And then within this next one, I'll do router link equals /widgets. I'll leave the third one alone for now. That's kind of more about the finished project that I have on GitHub. But let me go ahead and jump into the application here. I will now see that when I click on widgets, we go to widgets. When I click on Bootstrap, we go to Bootstrap. So this gives me, some flexibility, right, around being able to take the router that I have, just add attributes to the HTML elements that are responsible for navigating back and forth. And all I need to do is throw in the router link. I don't really need to do anything else. We know that the router is there. Of course, this is, we don't necessarily have child routes or anything like that set up currently, but it's still super easy to just add this attribute into my existing HTML and work with Bootstrap to be able to set up that navigation. Now, one thing that I don't like about this is that I don't know which is the currently selected item in my menu, right? I want to be able to see that a little bit. And luckily for us, we have something within Angular called router link active. So let me say that, router link active. Again, something we can just add onto the element here. And I'll just pass in and say active, and I'll copy and paste this. There we go. And let me now expand this a little bit more. So we see that now widgets, when I navigate to widgets, is actually highlighted here. And if I go to Bootstrap, we'll see now that turns into this nice little white color. So the reason that this works is that router link active that I have over here, what this allows me to do is just say, okay, when this router is active, so when this has been clicked, right? Then apply this particular class to the element. Now, what's nice about that is that we can just pass an active, which is, first of all, pretty intuitive, but also is what we need from Angular in order to be able to add that class that exists already within Bootstrap onto these elements. So by just adding router link and router link active into my navigation, I now have that full navbar from Bootstrap that also works alongside with the routing of Angular in order to be able to have this nice little navigation. I don't know about you guys, but I have spent a lot of time developing a lot of applications where I'm maintaining state, where I'm working with when I'm navigating to or from a component and updating CSS here or there or whatever it might be, right? Doing a lot of passing of information back and forth, and to just be able to take the navigation bar, add two attributes to it, and just automatically work with what I've set up on the TypeScript side of things, right? That makes my life that much easier. And again, we're just taking advantage of Bootstrap and the nice looking theme that we get from it. Okay, now what I want to be able to do quickly here now is that let's go ahead and actually add in some components onto the widget page, right? Dashboards kind of need something a little bit extra. Now, what I'm going to first do is I'm going to add a new file, and I'm just going to call this products.ts. And I'm going to pull in some data into here just in a bit. But within my widgets.component, I can also go ahead and just import this. Products from, and I'll just do /products. All right, perfect. We'll see now that there's nothing in here, right? It's not a module or anything like that. And my handy dandy copy and paste is actually missing. So just give me 1 second to actually pop that up for us here. We still have some time, which is nice. So we don't have to worry too much about this adding on too much time. All right, so let me go into products.ts. There we go. So this is just a local array that I'll be working with, right? Just for the sake of having data within my application. Now we should see that the page refreshes, should at least. All right, still not a module, it says. Let me just double check what's going on here. Just for the sake of that. All right, let me just actually behind the scenes here do a quick renewal of ng-serve. Sometimes that kind of fails on us a little bit on the back end there. But while that's happening, I'm also going to update this and just say that I'll make a private variable here called grid data. I'll eventually be using a grid. So do any equals products. So once Angular realizes that this is indeed a module that we can work with, we'll be able to be off to the races here. So I'll just quickly take a look at a sample item here within products.ts. There we go, kick things off. So we see that we have product ID, product name, we have some sub items and everything like that. So it gives us a little bit of more real data that we can potentially work with. And we have the grid, I call it grid data, there we go. We have that available within my widgets. But now if I go to the widgets page, nothing really happens. So let me just make this a little bit smaller and actually fix that. So when we pop over to the widgets component here, I'll remove this H1 and actually start building some things out. So I'll do another div, right? And we'll still work with Bootstrap. So we'll do container fluid /div, and then I'll do a row, and I'll add that my-3 because I just think that gives a nice enough little margin for us to give some space and make things look easy. Now, I do want to just quickly throw in a couple of Kendo UI buttons in here, and you'll see why in a second. And for those of you that haven't worked with Kendo UI before in the Angular sense, right, we have Kendo UI for Angular, which are a set of native components for Angular that work in a very Angular way, and of course, built from the ground up specifically for Angular. And all I'm doing is now I'm attaching this attribute Kendo button, and on one of them, I'm also defining the Kendo button here to be a primary, which gives me this nice little color blue there. What I'm going to also do before I forget is give this a column as well. Kind of forgot that. There we go. All right, perfect. Go ahead and save that. The reason that I did this is that I wanted to just give you an idea of course, we have buttons coming from Angular, so buttons may not be the most exciting piece of technology to add onto a page immediately, but we see here that just by adding the Kendo UI buttons onto the page, and I've included the Kendo UI Bootstrap theme, so this actually integrates directly with Bootstrap V4, and we see that this font right here is already picked up by the components. We see that this nice primary blue color is the exact same color that we have up here, right? So when I did BG-primary, right, that is the same link that we have here for these buttons. So if I went ahead and did a custom Bootstrap theme, for example, right, that I overrode some of these colors or what primary might be, but that can also be picked up by the Kendo UI component. So we can kind of not have to worry about, changing the color scheme in a bunch of different places, right? Thanks to the power of Sass, we can do that through variables. And then there we go. We have a nice little compiled CSS file that has these styles for us. I could also start adding in, let's say, another widget, right? So if I wanted to throw in another row here, I'll do -3, I'll do another div, throw in another column, just for sake of consistency. And then we can start adding in things like what I wanted to do here, right, is just add a Kendo grid. We'll give it the data equals grid data. I'm going to give it a height as well that I'm binding to. Set that to 410. And if I do /Kendo grid, we'll be able to see what happens on the page over here. So now we get a kind of a full list, right? A grid that, yes, it kind of works and is responsive in a way, but all the information is here, all the columns, everything that is defined within my products object is available here. So I don't necessarily want to do that. Instead, what I can do then is define each column one at a time, the one that I want to be able to include by just setting the field, set the equal to product ID, give this a title, and then I'll give this a width as well of 40. There we go. Go ahead and do /Kendo grid column. So if I save this, we'll now see that we have a single ID column here that takes up the entire width because we are within container fluid. So that's something that's nice about these components, especially something big as the grid. It can stretch and fit in with a parent container. And because it's set up to be fluid, we'll see that it takes up the entire width of the parent element. Now I can continue to go through and do this for a couple of more fields. So I can do product name, and I can do just say name here. We can also do, for example, category name, so we can access items within fields and the subfields of those. And I can continue to do that for a couple different columns here, right? So we'll see now that these get added. I am going to do a quick copy and paste job just for the sake of time for what we have here. And all that this does is that it adds the same columns that I just had. However, what I also have is down here at the bottom, I have a discontinued field that actually uses an Angular template. So this is something that I just wanted to highlight from the grid's perspective, that you can actually just use regular Angular templates within any one of the columns or a lot of places within Kendo UI components. Oh, and I accidentally went back, but now you can see here that we have a discontinued column that actually has an checkbox that we can work with that is bound to the data item that's passed in here, so the discontinued data item, whether that's true or false. However, now, when we're all talking about responsive, right? When I go back and I make this smaller, we'll see here that we just get this both horizontal and vertical scroll bar that we can work with. But this might not necessarily be what I want to do in the case of this Bootstrap project, right? I want to actually be able to start using things from Bootstrap to define what gets displayed and what doesn't get displayed. And what you can do is within each individual column, you can actually define the media attribute, and you can then pass in the sizes that we deal with on the Bootstrap side of things to be able to use those as the same breakpoints within the column. So for example, I can set up large here for media for the product ID, and then media here, for example, can be small. And we'll see now that the ID column isn't even there. The ID column doesn't appear until I hit the large breakpoint, and we see how that pops in nice and easy there for us. At the same time, right, as the menu goes from being available to us to collapsing. So we're working again with Bootstrap here. And at any point in time, I can just go through and do the same thing, for example, here. And if I do it for every single column, right? I wanted to do in stock And maybe for this last one right here, why not just say, out with it when it's when we're below large. We can now see that every single column is now driven by what's available from the media attribute here. And then as it gets a little bit smaller, we'll see that we can also take advantage of wrapping, or we get these scroll bars again. The height will remain the same because I did explicitly set a height, but you could of course also have a little bit of a variable height if you wanted to as well. But the reason that I wanted to throw this kind of into the application, right, is that every dashboard generally needs some sort of widget, right, that displays data. So the grid, we have charts and everything like that also works with responsiveness. And this is extremely important just from the sake of what we were doing with Bootstrap throughout the webinar, is that I'm not doing anything kind of magic-y or anything in a very specific Angular way in order to be able to modify Bootstrap, or I'm not doing anything within Angular to account for Bootstrap. And on the Kendo UI side, I'm not doing anything for really either library that makes it kind of feel the Kendo UI way. We're just taking things from Bootstrap, from Angular, just making it all kind of the way that we approach development with the components. And, that's kind of how we take things. Now, we've been here for about 45 minutes, and I know that, hey, maybe this isn't a full-fledged dashboard application where we're passing a ton of information back and forth, and it's updating live with the backend that I have available. But we did only have an hour, and I wanted to take some time for some Q&A as well. But this, I think, gives you a good introduction to some of the changes that have happened within Bootstrap V4. It gives you an indication of how you can start working with Bootstrap V4 and Angular in a very easy way, right? You can just throw in Bootstrap into your application. If you add it to the Angular CLI.json, it already starts making things prettier, and then you can start taking advantage of these various classes that we have available. We can see here how we have the new card system is set up to be able to replace almost everything that we've done with panel, thumbnail, and wells. So card is kind of the end-all be-all within Bootstrap V4. And we've also kind of seen how maybe some of the more advanced widgets out there can also integrate into your application pretty easily. And now what I will say is that as a part of my follow-up blog post, I will also have the source code to what we walk through here with a couple more widgets and just with a couple more things added to it. So that will be posted on GitHub, so you can take advantage of that and be able to start tinkering around with it. And of course, it's kind of hard to follow along here, right? But with that, I did want to go ahead and kick things over into the questions. You guys have been asking a lot of questions. If you haven't already, and if you don't know where you can see those questions, right? You'll be able to look on the right-hand side, or depending on where you put your GoToMeeting window, or GoToWebinar, I should say. But we do have a little questions box there. You can feel free to type away. So somebody asked if it will make sense to organize widgets in a subfolder of the app folder, or if there's any kind of better way than just throwing everything into the app folder. Yes, you can definitely throw it into subfolders and make it a little bit easier, right? If we look at my project right now, with the app folder open, this can kind of quickly become annoying to look through, right? So it definitely makes sense to create other folders and to be able to architect things that way. I'm just doing this to just explicitly for time. It really is what it is. You can also, take the routes, for example, and define that outside of app.module.ts. In fact, I would encourage that. But, trying to go through the script for today and trying to make sure that we had enough time, some of those a little bit best practices here and there we kind of have had to kind of take out, right? So some people said that there were some audio issues I've seen, and I apologize. And a lot of you said, hey, I can hear you, it's great. So hopefully for the folks that had audio issues, we'll see that everything kind of it lines up either in the recording or hopefully they fix themselves kind of as you were going through. I know that I paused for a second because I just wanted to make sure that if I was talking into nothing for a couple of minutes, right, that'll be a very disappointing webinar for everybody here. But I think that the majority of you heard and were able to follow along. So we'll see. So if there still is some, delay here, again, I apologize for that. I'm on a landline to try to help make things better, but we'll see here what kind of outcome we get at the end of the webinar. Now, someone asked, what is the unit of width? Is it a number of pixels? So when I was talking about the unit of width, right, of the the margin that I was setting within my columns and everything like that, and within my rows, that's actually set to REM. So that is just kind of the basic unit that they replaced from pixels, which used to be in Bootstrap V3, and now we're working with REM units instead. So when I say that, it was 3 units, it's just kind of 3 REM units there. Now, also somebody asked, isn't Bootstrap 4 still in alpha? How safe is it to use in production type environments? That's a great question. I could have highlighted that a little bit earlier as well, so I apologize for not mentioning that. Yes, it is. It's currently in the 6th iteration of the alpha. But from my understanding, the Bootstrap team has stopped development on Bootstrap V3. So that means that Bootstrap 4 is going to be taking a lot more, of course, focus from the team, right? And they can kind of really dive into it and make sure that something can get released. Of course, I don't know anybody on the team. I just happen to use Bootstrap V4. But if it's ready for production type projects, I personally think so, especially if you have people that prefer to use Sass. And if you want to start to kind of get ahead of things, it all depends, of course. But looking over the issues list that I see on GitHub and everything like that, it seems like it's a fairly at a fairly stable point. So I personally use it, although I'm not necessarily writing banking apps or apps that a ton of users might be using. But at the same time, I feel like it's probably ready to start using. I'm trying to also get to the Bootstrap kind of questions here before I jump into specifically some kind of UI questions. What are the main advantages of migrating from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4? I think that really, with the fact that Bootstrap picked up Sass as their main way of developing within CSS, right? I think that kind of allows us to kind of see the writing on the wall. And actually, one of my colleagues, Ed, wrote about this in a blog post. And it kind of means that Sass won the war, so to speak, that existed between Less and Sass. So from my perspective, although I'm not a designer and I don't necessarily work with a ton of CSS all the time, but for me, it's just ensuring, okay, I'm on the kind of, latest and greatest technology, right? And I'm working with Sass rather than Less. I've worked with a lot of Less in my time, especially because the original themes for the jQuery edition of Kendo UI is based on Less. So I've done a lot of that, but now Sass is kind of, the favorite technology there. On top of that, they have done a ton of improvements, and I think, reducing things down, like, for example, having that card element and not having panel, and everything else that kind of could contain items. I think that's an important piece to kind of streamline that a little bit, right, and not necessarily have a ton of different other classes that are out there. Now, some folks are asking if Bootstrap V4 is backwards compatible. A lot of what we saw within the classes there, so the rows and the columns, that's fairly consistent with what you already have within Bootstrap V3, right? So the breakpoints, for example, are all the same. The only big difference is that they now have extra large. I think it's not. I think it might just be XL. Off the top of my head, I just forget now for the Q&A here. But so you can, in terms of the overall layout, there should be a lot of similarities, but they don't contain the same classes, again, for streamlining, right? So you would have to do some modifications of your classes that you've used, especially if you're using, panel and and everything like that. I haven't seen or read too many things about this specific migration path, unfortunately, but I'll see if I can find something and maybe link to that in the follow-up blog post. Then we have a couple different questions around the Kendo UI widgets, so I'll just answer those quickly. First of all, yes, I did include the Kendo UI libraries ahead of time. I said that in the beginning that I cheated a little bit, and I've done a couple of NPM installs just for the sake of first of all, trying to download things from NPM Live could potentially be a bad idea. I didn't want everybody to sit here and wait for that. And I just included the Kendo UI widgets and kind of made sure that if I have the time, I could go through and add them into the widgets page. Now, there's a lot of other questions. For example, does Kendo UI need its own kind of specific responsive code in order to be able to work with Bootstrap? And the answer really is no. What you've seen when I've been moving the screen around, or the resizing the browser, I should say, and as I added the media tags and everything like that, it just works, with whatever the constraints are by the parent elements. So the grid doesn't need extra CSS, specifically implemented by you. The buttons or anything like that, they don't need that. It's all just available for you to be able to use, just to drop it in. So very easy to be able to work with it without necessarily having to work with, a lot of custom CSS on your side. Oh yeah, some people are asking why I set a height to the grid, and honestly, it's just for kind of some consistency, so I don't have to scroll through all the data in the browser. If I didn't set the height, all the items would just be displayed without implementing paging. So I didn't do a pager here. It just gives me an easy way to be able to constrain all the items, so we can kind of scroll through them if need be. But you don't need to set a height. You can feel free to leave without a height. The reason also that you might want to do something like that is, later I could, for example, forgo the height, but then have a pager and then have, 5 or 10 items that are displayed at once. So there's some flexibility there. I just did that for the demo's sake. A lot of you very recently asked, the source code. Yes, I will include the source code. It's all going to be on GitHub. Should be easy to install. You just need the Angular CLI. You need Node installed, and that's really it. Then you can just go ahead and do a quick npm install, and you'll be off to the races. So I'll include that. And there's a couple of other kind of specific questions, but what I'll do here, folks, is that I'll take everything that I have here in terms of questions. Even the ones that I just answered, I'll write out some answers to in that follow-up blog post. I'll include a couple more links so you can do some more research into Bootstrap V4. And also, of course, we'll have a recording of this session. So if you want to kind of take your time and walk through it and, kind of pause and see what I'm doing, et cetera. I know I did a couple of copy and paste jobs here to kind of cut down on time, but hopefully it wasn't too confusing to follow. So everybody's been very attentive. I see that, most of you have stuck around actually this entire time, so I appreciate that. But we have about, I can give you 4 minutes, or if I continue to ramble, maybe 3 minutes back of your day. So I appreciate your time today, folks. And feel free to look out on the blogs.tellers.com, as well as following me on @CarlBergenham, and I'll be able to post as soon as the blog post is up and running. So catch me on some tweeting there. All right, everybody, have a good rest of your day, and I appreciate you joining the webinar. Bye-bye.